Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Philippa, Director of People and Business at Community Housing Cymru, and I am the CHC lead for our HR Strategic Delivery Group. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to our Resilience webinar this afternoon, being run by Ian Rothwell of RW Learning, who are one of our commercial members. We are now day 4 into Mental Health and Wellbeing Week, so this session is appropriately timed. I attended my first online virtual conference this morning, and one of the sessions was discussing the impact of COVID on people's mental health and wellbeing. Mind had done a survey, and no surprise that over 2/3 of their respondents had reported a reduction in their mental health and wellbeing during this time. It is also an issue facing our HR teams and is in the top 3 priorities that we are currently grappling within the sector. What I have taken from my own experiences with mental health and wellbeing over the last 8 weeks is that there is no one size that fits all, and that whilst organisations can offer support and advice, it's also down to us as individuals to be responsible for our own health and wellbeing. Ian's session is going to help us look at how we can increase our personal resilience. If you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat box. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ian along to the session today.
Okay, all right. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As Philippa said, I'm going to focus on the well-being, on the resilience, and really echoing some of those comments in the introduction by Philippa around we are in some strange times, and as we progress through the challenge, things will become a little bit more normal. And I do think there is a number of phases that will come out eventually that we are in. I think the first phase we're in, which is the kind of getting used to this, what's this about? There's some awful things happening in the community. I think the next phase, where we're not there yet, and I haven't fully defined this, is that how do we really get used to the next norm, and how do we help people bounce through, particularly when, I hate to say, when the nights draw in. I know it's a long time yet, but thinking about that phase is also healthy, as well as it is to think about the here and now. Really, what I'm going to help you do is focus on a number of key areas, as you'll see on the slide there, which are things that are in front of you, the next couple of months. But also they're real practical things that you can just do straight away, immediately. And I'm going to ask you to do 1 or 2 things on the actual session today for you to practice that. So as you'll see, we're going to look at the first, and I think the most important thing at the moment, which is around how you cope with uncertainty. We're going to look at how you keep some focus and energy, how you start the day, how you maintain some of your energy throughout the day, but also the key thing that we see in reaction to a lack of certainty, which is anxiety. So where does that come from? And just some quick tips for you to do just to minimize that anxiety. Now, in this, I'm going to talk a little bit about, or use some of the methodology in the more recent science around the brain. It's not a session in neuroscience by any stretch, but I'm just going to weave in some of the things that are grounded and are practical that you can literally, like I said, go away and practice. I'm also going to talk a little bit about social connectedness, because it's been switched off a little bit with regards to work. And then I'm going to finish on developing, bouncing back, and how you develop grit. So each of those have just got some small bits of input, 1 or 2 bits of reflective questions, and then really for you to go away and do some top tips, basically from what I'm advising. So it's very practical. For those of you who've worked with us before, you'll recognize this. It's a very common slide. Really, I'm just putting forward and reinforcing the fact that when we look at our own mental health and our resilience, it's not a flat state. We're not rose-tinted glasses. We're not always optimistic. We're not always sad. And our resilience is really how we interplay with the challenges that we have and the opportunities that we have. So essentially, we need to look at what are the challenges and opportunities that we are experiencing, and clearly this one at the moment is a big one. And I think we need to recognize that at this present time, there would have been quite a lot of ups and downs, and the downs for some of you watching this, and some of you and your families and colleagues, the downs may have been higher, lower, and the highs may be okay. I've spoken to a number of people that are actually refocusing and doing pretty well at the moment, but maybe they've had a different curve than others. So speaking of curves, and what I like to call a slide really, in terms of when we look at productive well-being and productive resilience, we're starting to focus in the resilience and wellness area, but we have to recognize that in this challenge, and before all of this, we experience fatigue. I suspect some people I'm working with are experiencing fatigue from just being on these video conferencing for too long. So it's a different fatigue of what it was 9-10 weeks ago. But also, as we start to look down, there's what we call a loss of elasticity. So the process here is when you become a little bit more under stress, your brain becomes less flexible because there's more threat response. And then continually, there's the whole notion of overwhelm, and you will experience that, and you no doubt would have experienced overwhelm in terms of emotion, in terms of not knowing. And the last one, we're hoping none of you watching this are at this point, and I'm optimistic that we really play in the space of 1, 2, and 3. The reality is this up and down is going to be fatigue, it is going to be not knowing, but it's how you actually move forward quite quickly and take some more control over your emotions. And that's really where we're going to go. Okay, so let's start with, like I mentioned, the most significant one, uncertainty. And when I was writing the notes the other day, and it's slightly profound, but I suppose it's real, certainly real for me at the moment, is I think we're at a point where we are certain that there is uncertainty ahead. So that, in a way, starts to get us to think about some kind of certainty in a strange kind of way. But I'd just like you to just do a very brief thing for me. Is just think about over the past, well, 2 months really, and maybe something recently where you just there's no certainty, or there's a whole load of uncertainty. So think about an instance of time when you had that. While I take a sip of coffee. Now what I want to do now is, what were the emotions that you were experiencing? So what did it feel like when this whole uncertainty experience was prominent? And maybe you're in it now. So just write down some emotions, what it feels like. Okay. So some of you may have written things, I won't know because I'm not in a room physically with you, but you may have written things such as anxiety, anxious, fear, concern, sadness, loss, some quite strong emotions. And being uncertain about future can create some very, very strong resonant emotions that we hold and will continue to hold for some time. So always hold those emotions not in you, because when you're asked to think about uncertainty and emotion and what that's like, your brain's very sophisticated and will bring out those emotions for you, even though you're not in the middle of it now. So we can see that the lack of certainty ahead is an absolute thing that all of you have got to overcome with your peers, colleagues within the business, and absolutely in the communities that you support. I'm going to do a very little piece on the main functionalities of the brain, so I'm hoping some of you will have seen this sort of stuff. So it's reinforcing for some of you. Our brains are extremely sophisticated, as I mentioned, but they are very, very helpful. So some of the functionality of our brains clearly are to keep us alive, to keep us safe, to create order and meaning, to spot danger. Also, our brains are quite keen and sophisticated at wanting predictability, because if we have experiences like we do all the time, and we're not capable of saying, okay, I've got that now, that's got some certainty to it, then we just would overload. The prefrontal cortex of our brain would just be too much overloaded. So what we're trying to do, and this is a bit about certainty that's important, is that we're trying to filter our experience. So I meet, let's say it's Philippa. Philippa behaves in a way that is very like Philippa. So my brain is going, right, I need certainty. This environment with Philippa looks the same as normal. That's great, that's cool, we can carry on having a conversation. Now, if Philippa behaves in a very different way, or she's consistently inconsistent, then my brain's going to go, this isn't what I've experienced before about Philippa, and it will set off a mild, to start with, threat response. Now, if you take Philippa out of it, excuse that, Philippa, but if you take a person out of it and put into the context of not knowing what's happening next, even the government aren't really telling us everything, are they, let's be honest, and we don't know. So what our brain's trying to do is match the experience that we are seeing with a previous experience in order to feel comfortable. And it can't do that at the moment. Because it can't do that, it will set off a threat response and put you at times into what we call a mild hypervigilant state. So we're always on the lookout, always on guard for where's the next thing. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about threat response when we link it to certainty shortly. So that's a really key thing to remember when we look at the brain. So let's move from the spinning brain to this visual. Some of you may really like that visual. For some of you that don't like mountains and can't swim and don't like the cold, you might not like it. And what I want to emphasize here is in all our experiences, we are on lookout for threat and reward. So our brain centers, if you like, are on the lookout for, is this a threat? Is this person the same as what I've seen in the past? Have I seen this experience before? Well, no one's seen COVID-19 before, so that's going off quite frequently. But let's not forget, our brains are looking for reward. The interesting thing about the two of them is with reward, there tends to be more of a need for deliberate practice, for habits, for setting the day up so you move towards a reward. So it almost takes a little bit more conscious energy and discipline for you to increase your reward mechanisms. You can also do that around people as well. I know that's slightly switched off at the moment in terms of work, other than through the digital platforms that we're using, like this one. Now, threat is slightly different in terms of, because our brain's primarily looking for us to understand the world, but it's also seeking out structure and certainty and threat. It does figure stronger in terms of how we experience threat versus reward, how we process it psychologically, how our emotions resonate from it, and also how we remember it. We tend to remember easily remember some pretty stressful scenarios and relay those into the here and now than we do rewarding scenarios. In fact, what we try and support people to do is think about when it's working well and bring that into the here and now, because the natural sense is to do the threat response first. Now, the bad news is, as I mentioned, threat appears in terms of its imprint, its resonance on us as humans, significantly more than reward, which is why you have to do more rigor, more discipline to try and set the day up for each of you and your teams and to reward the threat. The natural response will be to look out for threat. So you may be asking, well, okay, that's a bit of the theory, a bit of the kind of understanding. So what do we do about that? Okay, so I'm going to move us into some of the tips with this. If we look at, I call these channels. So our brain is, yes, on the lookout for threat and reward, as I mentioned, but it's what we seem to understand, and there's not much changed over recent 6-7 years, actually, with more the growth of functional MRI. You can see what's going on in the brain. Not much change in terms of these channels. So just want you to just have a read down. We're only going to focus on mainly 2 over the next 20 minutes or so. Okay. I am going to go into certainty again in a practical sense, and I'm also going to look at autonomy or control. Now, some of you may think, yeah, I've worked with people, maybe it's people if you've worked in the trades that maybe they don't want to take as much control or as much responsibility, and we use that sort of phraseology quite a lot. I kind of get that, and there is that's real, that's a habit. But if you strip it down, our brains still want to feel that we are in control. Now, I'll tell you what, anyone in any trade, in any role across this sector, if you start taking control off them and making decisions, whether they like it or not, probably not, because it's someone else's decision, then it will create a threat response. So essentially, control is really, really key, particularly as feels a little bit out of control at the moment, which is why I wanted to focus mainly on those 2. So, certainty on autonomy or control. Let's have a look at what we need to do on the certainty side of things. So our brains love certainty, adore it, want it, seek it, on the lookout. When it's not there, as I said earlier, then it can bring out a less of a positive response, which is our threat response. Now, again, just summarizing this, if you take what I just said, that means that most change, whether significant or not, whether you've decided to change yourself or it's put upon you, no one chose for COVID-19 pandemic, did they? Then our brains will see it as a threat, as I mentioned. So change in general in life, in an organization, is a threat or sets a threat response off. So how do we start to, well, I use downregulate, maybe it's a bit of a jargon, but I mean, how do we stop or minimize the threat response going off significantly, and how do we increase more reward? Because that's the key thing, the key central thing in terms of your well-being and your resilience, and how you get through this and eventually, you know, thrive through the whole process. So I'm going to give you a couple of key things we look at. One is around good quality reactivity, and what I mean by that is how you emotionally respond to a threat, how you emotionally respond to a stimulus, something's going on in the environment, but also how you become a little bit more smarter with your brain. I don't mean IQ here now. I don't mean IQ. It's not about that. What I mean is your ability to talk to your brain a little bit more, be a bit more interested in it, and take more control. The second one is around good quality work routines. So how do we take great self-care habits as well? So we look after ourselves in all of this. Okay. Now, these two areas are just to kind of have a read of them. They're the things that happen when you have one or the other. Interestingly, if you take reward in essence, in terms of some neural pathways, the things that are going on in the brain, simplistic terms. So I've had a couple of conversations recently about humour and about fun, and one of the fairly recent bits of research on humour is that the neural pathways, so what's going on in the brain simply when we are in laughter mode and humour mode, right? Those, when they're fired up, so that they are working, if you like, or lighting up, your threat response cannot light up at the same time. So we've said for years, haven't we, around, oh, you know, a bit of humour, a bit of fun, a bit of banter. I'm not saying you go, you know, because you can't take lightheartedness of what's going on at the moment, but actually taking a lightheartedness of yourself and having a word with yourself, or trying to find some humour, you can do a little bit more of that in the day and be around humour. You can't be in a threat response at the same time. So you're kind of like switching it off. So just a thought there. But here's the areas around threat and reward. We know that if you are more in rewards, you've got more cognitive resources, you can think better, think clearer, you've got more insights, you can generate more ideas. So, you know, we know the logic says that, but actually it's the emotion that prevents us from moving towards reward mechanism. That's why good quality reactivity with your emotions and brain is really, really important, as well as the routines. Okay, I'll start with a slightly different visual with regards to brain, emotion and resilience. Most of you at some point will have moved house. Most of you will have done it well or not so well, or done it in an okay way. When we do move house, it is pretty good when you're boxing things to put something on the box to tell you what's in them. It's also pretty good to say what room it's supposed to go in. So everything's fairly structured and you know where it is and where it should go. So really what we're trying to do here with emotions is try and label them and put some structure to them. So by labeling your emotion and talking to this prefrontal cortex, this front part of your brain, which is more for logic and thinking things through, it also regulates your emotions, so it tries to kind of make you think and reflect. By putting things in boxes and labeling your emotion, it's the first universal thing here now on this, labeling your emotion, you start to move away from the limbic system, which is part to do with your threat response, and move towards the thinky bit in your head that starts to rationalize. So when you're starting to feel uncomfortable or unsure or uncertain, label it. Don't let it run to emotion, to then physiological, heart rate, stress, and all the horrible things that go with chronic stress if you let that go on for too long. Label the emotion as soon as you can. You almost have to get a little bit more curious. We'll talk about that in a minute. Curious with your emotions so you can be objective quicker to control the emotion, control and basically drive up your resilience and well-being. So I'm going to give you a bit more sort of linear stuff here rather than boxes and moving houses. So have a look at these. The first step is be a little bit more inquisitive. I mentioned this earlier with what's going on in your brain, because it is trying to help you. It just gets it wrong sometimes because it's trying to keep you out of threat and alive. So acknowledge the emotions with curiosity. So, so this looks like, that's interesting. I'll give you a real one. Since we started doing these things, I didn't do a lot of these up until 6 weeks ago. So I went through that process of like, oh, I've got to do one of these things. And even with this one, this is a new technology for me. Well, okay, so I'm a little bit unsure about this. Why am I unsure? Well, I've not used this before. So that's my brain going, this is uncertain world. So what do I need to do to create more certainty? What do I need to say to myself? So I feel a bit concerned because I don't know. So move from being curious and stepping back to label your emotion. I'm unsure, I'm sad, I'm confused. The moment you say those emotions or emotion, like the boxes when you move in house, you start to move glucose, okay, and blood into the blood that you need into this part of the brain. It's weird, but just by saying that, it moves it out of here more into here. So then you can start to be more analyze yourself and distance yourself and be, oh, that's interesting. I am getting cross, I am concerned. Why am I getting concerned? Why am I letting this bother me again? So you start to distance yourself and then think of other ways. What else could I do in terms of my thinking, and what other ways could I perceive the situation that may be helpful and not put me into this scenario where I don't feel good about myself or I feel concerned or worried. And then the last one, frankly, just pick one and adjust with it. Don't spend too much time in analysis. You've got to do something to then create a new habit, a new pathway. There's your 5-step recovery. Right, I think this is a really important one. This is not a scenario, this is not a seminar or webinar rather in anxiety in any stretch. But I am going to just get you to think about anxiety just for a second. Just in your head or write down, what are the things that make you anxious? Just a couple of phrases, words. Okay. And now what happens if you continue to think about those emotions, not in here and now, but when you've had those, you bottle or you brood them, what happens to you if you don't let those out and you let them think them through in your own head? I suspect, I hope that all of you aren't saying, oh, it's great, I'll run it around my head and deal with it. Sometimes you can. But the key point here around anxiety and emotion with the brain is that, there's some of the phrases, don't open the can of worms, or, big boys don't cry, I don't want to talk about my emotions. It's just, I'm going to be emotional if I'm talking about, well, you might be. But guess what? If you look at a live scan of the brain, all right, and what's called emotional arousal in the limbic system, so seeing what happens when someone's invoking an emotion. If that emotion is not expressed as in with language, language is another bridge into the prefrontal where you can take some control. If it's not let out through language and understanding and discussion, whether that's some of the good things that you folks do, whether it's coaching, counselling, it's not let out. The emotional arousal stays the same in the brain or gets worse. So it never gets better if you hold it in. And that's a scientific thing rather than it is about, it's good to talk. So just do think about that. and the emotional arousal will either get worse or stay the same if you suppress it. Okay, last one on how do you downregulate when you're feeling uncertain around the future. So I'm going to give you 6 steps with this one. So if you are uncertain about what's happening or what to do, the first step is a reappraisal of your emotions. That's, again, very similar thing. How do I feel, and so on. But this is the new thing that I want to emphasize, is you think about what's not going to change. I hope by now, some of the things I've mentioned, you'll know that the normal emotion would be about, oh, it's changing, uncertainty, threat response, I need to try and downregulate it. Another way of doing this, folks, is to clarify what isn't going to change. So you're almost forcing the brain to think about what is remaining the same. Now, I don't know the answer of that. It could be, I still have a job, I don't have a job, my family are very, very healthy, people are safe. Whatever it is, get your focus on what you think is definitely not going to change. And what you're doing is you're moving the brain to think about certainty and predictability. Then if you focus on your own skills and qualities in that certainty, you're bringing out previous experience and positive emotions associated with you using those skills within those times that are certain, with your saying they're still going to be certain. Just continuing to downregulate threat response. Visualize your behavior. So the brain is very good at predicting the future, which is why we worry about change, because we're able to do that with a limbic system of a threat response, which means we have a propensity to worry about change. But visualize your behaviors in the future. And the other thing is around relate to others with it. And then take the first step again, it's ending with action, do something and reappraise. So there's a slightly new angle here around creating certainty. Look for certainty first, visualize yourself and focus on the strengths. All of this is just helping you, yes, to be more well at work and support others, but also to just try and create more certainty by doing so. Okay, right, start the day well. I'm going to move into this area now, and it's not about writing a list, to-do list. I've seen a number of documents in this sector around priorities, and there's a number of pages of priorities. I'm not saying that the business doesn't have lots of priorities, but for you, for your well-being and those that you work alongside and you support, it isn't about a plan, and it's certainly not about, because this does happen, I start to do a list, where do I go? Oh, and then I get to number 2 and I've got to do everything. That's not starting the day well. What I'm talking about here is just spending some time focusing on your priorities. You can start to do that the day before. It's often called priming. So if you're thinking about the next day, prime your brain. I'm going to do that first. I'm going to do that first. It can work for fitness as well. For those of you who want to go for that morning run, now you're allowed out a bit more. You can, something I do is I put my kit. So I literally put it on straight away. My shoes are ready at the door. So it just means I'm primed. I know that's really easy. I don't have to think about that. I can focus on, that's a priority. I need to get my fitness. So I set the structure around me to make it very easy to do so. And one of the phrases we use is prioritize the priorities. Again, it's helping the brain to make some predictability. You know, you don't always finish everything, but still helping the brain at that given time at the start of the day to be starting to predict and create some certainty. Okay. And the next thing is around how do you continue the day well? We've talked a lot about threat. I mentioned and reward, but there's another thing that the brain releases, a chemical. Most people have heard of this, dopamine. It's very common these days, the phrase. We are still in a world where there's lots going on and we're getting caught up in the news and so on. If you choose to do that, that's your choice. But the distractions are still there. So setting the day up can be great, but still someone comes along and takes some time away. That's fine, that's there. Less so now. What we often give people tips on is create moments in the day that you are structuring. It's in your structure that give you reward. So if you look at the right side, this is deliberate drip feed of reward or dopamine in this sense into your brain. I mean, you're not physically doing that clearly. but focus on getting some time, whatever your reward is, whatever it is it going for a walk, taking a dog for a walk, mine's going to be a water balloon fight at 5 o'clock. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm looking forward to it. So I structure things in it, and some of you probably do this, but do think, if you're feeling a bit down on energy, how much dopamine are you allowing yourself to have, so feeling good in the day, versus how much concern. The other thing around start the day well is achieve something really early on in the day, whether that is yoga, going for a run, structuring the day, or tackling an assignment you really need to think clear about. Your brain's, if you're rested well, your brain is best in the morning to think through these sorts of things. So use that time wisely, start to think and solve the problem that you need to do. And the energy you'll get and the dopamine release you'll get from that yes, it will lift you and motivate you. It's called a motivational drug, but it'll also lift you into the next activity. So it will mean that when you hit with the next activity that you should have planned, you've got more energy, focus, and a sense of control for it. Okay, I'm going to just do an activity on autonomy and control for you now to think about. I'm hoping most of you have seen this. So this is about how you take back control. We're just going to do another 2 or 3 minutes. I think we're another 3 minutes. Now, most of you will have seen Stephen Covey around circle of concern, circle of influence. If you haven't, it's not rocket science. I'm just going to put emphasis on it and link it to the here and now and the challenges and opportunities we face. Back to control. If you think things are out of control, then that's okay. That's normally human. Start to think about what they are. Write them down. What is in my circle of concern? That's the outer white circle. Put them down. Take a check of them, have a look, what can I control about them? Sometimes you can't, and you can control your emotions and let it go a little bit and move into areas that you can influence, whether that's your well-being, just in your nutrition, spending more time with the family. And I've got the hang of schooling, nowhere near like the teachers, but I can influence that. I can understand a little bit more and try and improve my ability to do that. So what the key emphasis here is, if you feel out of control, because lots of things are controlling you, or if you sense that, write them down, challenge whether they are in your control, and just ask yourself, how long will I let me feel like this? Focus on what you can influence, and your brain will again create more certainty in that influence, and you'll find you feel better, but also you'll feel you're in more control, and it's almost a sense of your influence increases. That's really, really key top tip. Have a read of this. I'm not saying things don't enter your psyche. Just some of this is about being proactive, but some of it's just try and ensure you don't let all the negativity in, whether that's about some of the media or how you respond to it. You're in control of a lot of this, folks. You're in control of a lot of it. It may feel like you're not because your certainty is lower, which sets these systems off. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I think that you lot in this sector have got it pretty to a T. I mean, it's part of the DNA, isn't it, around social connectedness, supporting the communities. I thought it was appropriate to weave that in this particular visual. Please, I've just made a couple of things here around just to be aware of. Is this video conferencing, structure it so people feel connected. That's good for the brain and for your well-being. So, and predictability, I know I'm doing this at 10, 11, 12, whatever it is. Structuring time away from the screen. I think there'll be a new thing coming up around screen fatigue on visual video conferences. Create the breaks, use the dopamine breaks as I mentioned. Reinforce value to the team, because just because you're not physically with them, we still as humans and our brains still need affirmation and feel valued. So just ensure you do some of those habits that work well when you're physically in the same room. And they're really the key things. There's a drug called oxytocin released in the brain, that's from contact. You're not getting that with your colleagues at work at the moment. You get loads of it at home, get more of it than you normally do at home. Embrace your family as much as you possibly can. I know some of us can't, other ends of family, grandparents and so on. But that will give you some more oxytocin release, which is the kind of the feel-good drug from contact. I use this slide quite a lot. I'm just emphasizing within your teams, within the businesses that you're in. Talked about emotional arousal, so don't suppress it. General tip, do not suffer alone. Those that do or don't express or feel they can't express how they're feeling, suffer more. And with us feeling less connected physically at the moment, it can almost put us into that space of I won't bother anyone because I'm feeling a bit step back from the business or my team. Just ensure that isn't the case with yourself and people that you work with. Okay, I'm just going to finish with this bit around bouncing back and developing grit. Just literally a couple of quick points. There's a lot going on about grit at the moment, but I'm just going to give 3 top tips. First thing, when you are bouncing back, just strip all the job titles or everything out. As a human, we need those 3 things. We need nutrition, we need sleep, and we need exercise or movement. Now, this isn't a program on stress response, but essentially those 3 things done well and routines will create a better stress response. Stress response being how you respond to a challenge. So you get those right. I'm not going to say any more about how, because it's not the time to do that. I may think about that in the future. Just remember, these are the 3 things that get you a good grounding to bounce back from. So get your grounding right and get the routines right there. And lastly, tips for developing your grit in all of this. Remember your purpose. Remind yourself why you do what you do, especially in this sector. It's close to the heart for most people that are watching this and why you joined and why you enjoy what you're doing, stay doing what you're doing. Remind yourself of that purpose. It's not gone. It just may need to be reminded. Practice the growth mindset. And what I mean by that is you may fail. That's fine. That's part of learning. Every time something goes wrong, you learn something. Don't judge yourself. Be easier on yourself, particularly in this time. Be easier on yourself. And the last one, we've done it. Manage those powerful emotions, harness them. You cannot fight biology with what's happening in the brain and the chemical release, but you can harness it. And if you harness it with some of those tips, I suspect we'll share some slides as well, you will create more well-being in you and those around you, keeping an eye on them, and you'll develop a lot more resilience and grit to get through what is going to be a very testing time. So that's it from me. I believe we are going to get some questions. So I'm more than happy to answer as much as I can in the time that we've got. So I'll hand over, I think, to Pip for some questions.
Thanks, Ian. Really useful. What's your tip for those that are currently isolated? So they've got no family members around them. They're feeling isolated from work, isolated from their friends and family. How can they increase their social interaction?
Okay, so is the question around those watching this or concerns about people in the community or that are like that? Do you know?
It's about people experiencing themselves.
Okay, so the first thing is to accept that we are social animals, some people more than others, okay? The brain is a sociable organ, it needs to feel connected. So you will feel lower energy when you have lower sociability. Sometimes you may be experiencing this now, the habitual response is to retract because you'll feel lower in energy, so you'll feel less wanting to do more. And that can be almost addictive because you can build phrases and narratives that, well, I'm feeling down. So you almost go further back down. So I'd say one of the most important things, first of all, know that you're a social animal. And that means that this is going to happen. It's normal. You're not just on your own, isolated, feeling like that. Others in the same scenario are like that. Secondly, it is a bit about shaking yourself up and thinking through, acknowledging your emotions of feeling on your own, because they are real for you and they'll be strong and they'll remain. Think about things that will connect you socially, but not in the ways that you normally know, because the easy one is to go, oh, I normally socialize this way, because the brain wants certainty. It's going, that's how I normally socialize. I'm not getting that now, so I'm not getting any sociability. It's not that, because you can create sociability through all these platforms that we're trying to see. So if you're feeling isolated, if you can get fresh air, vitamin D, sun, you can create a routine to go out. If you cannot and you're totally isolating, look for ways to feel connected through technology. I can't stress how important that is, because it's really the only main vehicle, other than you taking control of your emotions, to get more social connectedness. Find what you love as well, stuff that you can do indoors.
Okay, and resilience been described as an elastic band. Sometimes it's high and sometimes it's very low. So how can you try and moderate the highs and the lows during this period of intense uncertainty and pressure for yourself and also for the teams out there?
Yeah. Okay. Let's deal with the highs. So emotions and resilience is relative, isn't it? Just like life, in that no things remain the same. So there's always going to be a variation. So for something to feel wrong or sad, it's a variation from a norm or variation from the top. So we have to understand that we will always have these. So accepting that there will be ups and downs. In terms of how do I create, I think, more of a high or cope with it, because some people can get overexcited, is to keep your emotions in check. So if you feel yourself getting like really kind of hyped up over something, maybe it is a positive thing, stop, label the emotion again and think, why am I seem to be getting, whoa, this is, well, because I haven't done this in ages, I'm seeing someone physically. So again, try and tag and label the emotion of hype, but know that, you know what, you are not going to stay up there forever, because in itself, a peak means you're at the top. And we heard a lot about that phrase, peak of late, haven't we? So it means you've got to come down. So even as you start to come down, it may feel that you're on a low. Actually, you're not. It's relative, just coming down to a lower sense. So that's the first thing about when you recognize that you will come down, and even just some movement down may feel you're losing something. In terms of managing real lows, I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that you're going through the low, but acknowledge really early on. That first or second slide, when it went all the way down to identity, never get to that point when you're analysing yourself. So when you start to feel a low, do something about it, and that's pretty obvious. What's really helpful practically is start to think about, right this minute now, away from it, write it down as a question. What are my triggers in now? What do I know about myself now in this pandemic? What are the triggers that create the low? So what you're doing is being proactive with dips in your resilience and thinking about the things that do that, trigger you down. As well as when you do start to move down, to start to appraise, I'm feeling low, why am I feeling low? Is that my brain? Is that my nutrition? What is it? But that's a reactive response to managing your resilience. The proactive is answer the question, what are the things, the triggers that set me off to start to deplete my resilience and make me feel sad or low? And just get those a little bit more visible, and you're going to be aware of them because you've got the language there to help you. And then avoid some of the triggers, or know when you're walking into them and don't walk into them.
That's fantastic. So we're just coming up to the end of the session now. I'm going to take some inspiration from you. I'm going to go and put my running shoes on and do a quick 3-mile run to get out and to improve my resilience from a day stuck in front of the screen today. So thanks ever so much, Ian, on behalf of CHC and our members. Again, to everybody that's listened in today, thank you ever so much. A copy of the recording will be sent out to all delegates first thing tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides. So thank you very much. Again, as always, please stay safe, take care, and look after yourselves. Thanks, Ian.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Thanks, CHC. Great work. Thank you.